I had just turned 20, and to be honest, I couldn't believe my luck. Finding a private house for that kind of money these days was like winning the lottery. It was an old brick mansion on the edge of town, surrounded by a garden that hadn't seen a pair of shears in 10 years. When the realtor met me, he didn't even go inside. He just handed me the keys on the doorstep, quickly signed the papers, and drove away so fast his tires kicked up gravel. I just laughed at the time. I thought the guy was just weird or in a hurry. The first 3 days I was on cloud 9. I walked through the empty rooms, listened to the floorboards creak, and planned where I'd put my computer and my lounge area. The house was quiet and very cozy. Sunlight filled the living room through the high windows, and I even started getting used to the smell, a mix of old paper and dried herbs. The first warning sign happened on the 4th evening. I was sitting in the kitchen, drinking coffee and scrolling through my phone. Suddenly, I heard a clear sound from upstairs, on the 2nd floor. It sounded like someone had dropped a heavy bunch of keys on the floor. Clink. I froze. My heart sped up a bit, but I immediately calmed myself down. It's an old house. The wood is drying, the foundation is settling. I went upstairs, turned on the light, nothing. All my boxes were exactly where I left them. I shrugged and went to bed. The next 2 days were perfect. I even forgot about the incident. The weather was great. I worked in the garden and trimmed dead branches. In the evening, I cooked dinner, watched a movie, and fell asleep to the steady hum of the old refrigerator. It was a moment of total peace. I felt like the master of my own life. On the 7th night, everything changed. I woke up at 3 in the morning because the room had become very cold. I reached for my blanket and felt that the air in the bedroom was thick, like I was underwater, and then I heard it again, but it wasn't keys. From the hallway came a quiet rhythmic sound, thump, 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 like someone was walking very slowly on the carpet, leaning heavily on a cane. I sat up in bed listening. The sound was coming straight toward my door. I held my breath. Thump, thump. The sound stopped right outside my bedroom door. I stared at the door handle in the moonlight. It didn't move, but I could clearly hear through the crack at the bottom how someone on the other side was breathing very heavily and raspily. It's how people breathe when they've been running for a long time or are in great pain. I wanted to yell, "Who's there?" but my voice was just gone. 30 seconds passed. Suddenly the sound started again, but it was moving away. Thump, 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 toward the stairs, and then I heard it. Downstairs on the 1st floor, the basement door slammed shut loudly and clearly, the very door I had locked with a bolt before going to sleep. I sat with my lamp on until dawn. When the sun came up, the fear faded a little. I went downstairs and looked into the hallway. The basement door was closed. I pulled the handle. It was locked. "Well, Egor," I told myself, "you just have a wild imagination. Old house, echoes, night noises." I even laughed at myself, made some strong tea, and decided I just needed more rest. The whole day went by peacefully. I even drove into town for groceries and talked to people. I came home in the evening just as gray clouds started to cover the sky. I went into the kitchen, put the bags on the table, and happened to look into that old mirror in the hallway. On my clean, washed mirror right in the middle was a clear handprint, but it wasn't mine. The fingers were unnaturally long with no skin prints, just smooth gray stripes, and the mark was on the inside of the glass. The entire next day I spent in a daze. I didn't wipe the mark off the mirror. I just threw an old sheet over it and tied it in a knot. I felt like if I couldn't see it, it wasn't there. The weather turned completely bad. The sky was leaden, and a light rain drummed monotonously on the roof. This sound usually calms me, but that day it felt like the whispering of 1,000 tiny voices. By lunchtime, I forced myself to calm down. Who knows what was on the mirror? Maybe an old defect appeared because of the humidity. I decided to get busy. I started cleaning out the storage room on the first floor. It was full of old junk, newspapers from the 40s, broken chairs, and piles of empty jars. The work went fast. I even turned on music on my phone to break the silence of the house. Peace was slowly returning. I even thought, Egor, you're just overworked. Moving is always stressful. In the corner of the storage room, I found an old children's photo album. It was heavy in a leather binding. I sat on the floor and started flipping through it. There were normal black and white photos. People in front of this very house, children on swings. Everything looked normal until I got to the middle. One photo showed the living room I was sitting in right now, but in the background in the doorway stood a chair, a normal wooden chair, except it was hovering a few centimeters off the floor, and its shadow was falling upward onto the ceiling. I closed the album. My hands were shaking. I stood up, walked out of the storage room, and looked toward the living room. The chair was sitting right there, a perfectly normal chair. It was on the floor where it belonged. I went over to it, touched the wood. It was hard and cold. The shadow was on the floor. Just a defect in the film, I thought, an optical illusion. I decided to distract myself and take a shower. Hot water always helps to relax. I stood under the stream for 10 minutes with my eyes closed. Steam filled the bathroom. It was warm and cozy. I turned off the water, reached for a towel, and suddenly froze. It was quiet in the bathroom, too quiet, and through the layer of steam I heard a sound, a quiet squelching sound, like someone was very slowly wringing out a wet rag. Squelch, squelch. The sound was coming from the sink. I wiped my face with the towel and looked there. Something pink and soft was slowly crawling out of the drain. At first I thought it was some trash or soap residue, but it kept coming. A second later I realized what it was. A human tongue. It was unnaturally long, with no mouth, no face, just a living piece of muscle writhing at the bottom of the white sink. It seemed to be tasting the air. I almost threw up. I backed away, hitting my back against the tiles. I watched, unable to look away, as the tongue slowly and smoothly pulled back into the drain. Silence returned to the bathroom. Only the water drops fell steadily from the faucet. I ran out of the bathroom, pulling on my clothes as I went. The fear was so strong that I wanted to drop everything and leave, but it was already dark outside, and my car. I remembered I left the keys in the kitchen. I went downstairs. The kitchen was dark. Only the light from a street lamp peeked through the rain. I grabbed the keys from the table and was about to run for the door, but my eyes fell on the bags of groceries I had brought earlier. One of the bags was torn open. The apples I had bought were lying on the floor, but they weren't red. Every apple was sliced in half, and inside, instead of seeds and core, were human teeth. Dozens of small yellow teeth growing into the flesh of the fruit. They were pressed tight together, as if the apples were smiling at me from the inside. At that moment, behind my back, in the empty hallway, I heard that sigh again. But now it was closer, much closer. And following the sigh, I heard a voice. It wasn't raspy or scary. It was the voice of a little girl, very thin and clear. Egor, why aren't you eating? We tried so hard. I slowly turned around. There was no one in the hallway, but the sheet I had used to cover the mirror was now slowly sliding to the floor, as if someone was pulling it from below. I stood in the kitchen, squeezing the car keys so hard the metal dug into my palm. The sheet from the mirror fell to the floor centimeter by centimeter, revealing the dark glass. I didn't want to look there. I knew if I looked I would see something that would completely break my mind. But the house became quiet again. The sound of the rain outside suddenly got louder, and that familiar noise brought me back to my senses a little. These are hallucinations, I told myself. It's food poisoning, Mold in the old house, anything but reality. I forced myself to walk to the table and pick up one of the apples. My hands were trembling. I turned it over. A normal red apple. No teeth. Just fruit. I exhaled. All that horror in the bathroom. Those apples. It all flashed by like a short waking nightmare. I probably just fell asleep in the shower from exhaustion. I picked up the sheet from the floor and threw it over the mirror again. Nothing moved under the fabric. Normal wood. Normal glass. I decided I wasn't going anywhere in this storm. The road on the edge of town was washed out, and driving in this state was a death sentence. I locked all the doors with bolts, checked the windows, and went up to my bedroom. I turned on every lamp in the room. The light gave me a false sense of safety. 2 hours passed. I sat on the bed, propped up with pillows, flipping through an old book, trying not to listen to the rustles of the house. Gradually I began to fall asleep. My eyelids grew heavy. The fear dulled, turning into a hollow anxiety. The silence no longer pressed on me. It lulled me. I woke up at 4 a.m. from a strange feeling. The room was pitch black. All the lamps were out. But that wasn't the scariest part. I felt that the bed had become different. It was soft, but not like a mattress. Beneath my back, something was rhythmically rising and falling. I froze, afraid even to open my eyes. It felt like breathing, the huge, heavy breathing of a whole creature that I was lying on. I slowly reached my hand to the side to feel for the nightstand, but my fingers sank into something wet and warm. I opened my eyes. There was no furniture in the room. The walls of my bedroom were no longer covered in wallpaper. They were covered in living pink skin. Thick blue veins ran across them, pulsing in time with my heart. The ceiling was slowly lowering, and I could see thick, clear saliva dripping from it. I tried to jump up, but my legs got tangled in the blanket, which now felt more like a net made of thin tendons. I struggled. I screamed, but only a quiet whistle came out of my throat. The whole house, this entire mansion, had turned into one giant internal organ. And then I noticed the detail that made me go silent with horror. On the wall, right across from me, where the window used to be, there was now a giant ear. It was human, but the size of a door, and it was slowly turning toward me, listening to my racing pulse. From the depths of the hallway, which now looked like a long esophagus, the little girl's voice came again, but now it sounded right inside my head. Egor, be quiet. The house is listening. It really likes the sound of your fear. It's its favorite music. I felt the floor under my bed slowly begin to open, forming a deep crack that smelled of stomach acid. I realized the house wasn't chasing me. It was digesting me, and it was doing it very slowly so the taste of my terror wouldn't go away. At that moment, someone knocked on the ear on the wall. 3 clear knocks from the outside, from the side where the street should be. Knock, knock, knock. And a voice, my own voice but calmer and more confident, spoke from behind the wall. Hello? Is anyone home? I've come to see this mansion. The realtor said it was very cheap. I realized it was me. It was me a week ago standing on the doorstep, and the me currently lying in this meat trap was just a memory the house was chewing on right now. I felt the pulsing meat floor beneath me vibrate from the sound of my own voice coming from outside. The me standing on the doorstep a week ago was full of hope, but this me, suffocating in the sticky warmth of the living walls, was just dessert. The house suddenly went quiet. The walls froze. The veins stopped pumping blood, and even the giant ear on the wall went still, catching every word of the guest outside. It was the silence of a predator holding its breath before it jumps. I understood. The house isn't just digesting me. It's clearing space for a fresh portion. The crack beneath me widened, and I began to slowly slide down into the darkness that smelled of old iron. I desperately clawed with my fingers at the wet ridges that used to be baseboards. My nocti cervalis, my nails tore, leaving deep ruts in the pink flesh of the walls. The house let out a quiet, satisfied groan. "Help me," I screamed to the person standing outside the door. "Don't come in. Get out of here." But instead of a scream, a strange mechanical sound came from my throat, that same ticking of a cane I had heard before. Thump, thump, thump. Every word I spoke turned into that sound. I realized that old man with the cane I saw on the highway, or those sounds in the hallway. Those were the screams of previous victims that the house had processed into its own noises. I fell into the darkness of the basement, but it wasn't a basement. I found myself in a huge hall where the walls were made of thousands of mirrors. In each of them, I saw myself, but at different ages. In one mirror, I was 5 years old and crying. In another, I was 70 and dying. And in all these reflections behind my back stood that same sheet. It no longer covered the mirror, it was part of it. In the center of the hall stood that same chair from the photo album. It was still hovering a few centimeters off the floor. The little girl was sitting on it. She was wearing a dress made of human eyelids that were constantly blinking, creating a terrible rustling sound. She had no mouth, just a narrow slit sewn shut with thick thread. "We don't eat flesh, Egor." Her voice sounded right in my brain, cold and clear. "We eat time. Your past has already been eaten. Your future is just a seasoning." She stood up and her shadow on the ceiling began to stretch, turning into giant jaws. "Now you will become a door," she whispered.